So there was a challenge that was put out to, I guess, all of us. In particular, it was that the presentations that we give are not the standard presentations, that we just do something very different. And so last night, I essentially sat down and ripped across everything that I've done before and pulled something completely unique together. You will not see this presentation ever again. I usually talk about the Medici Effect. It'll soon pop up on the screen here. And I'll talk about it today as well. The Medici Effect is really what happens when we combine two separate industries or cultures or fields, and when we find this connection and explore that connection. Okay, so usually when I talk about the intersection and the combinations of different ideas at corporations and so on, I will tell them about the concept of that. An architect may combine the way termites build their mounds on African savanna in order to radically construct a new type of building in Africa. In this case, this is an architect that's created a building that uses up about 90% less energy. Looking at how termites do it, this is the building Eastgate. I will talk about that. Or I'll talk about how the concept of a standard computer, when combined with, say, candy, can completely revitalize a company. Or I'll talk about how a designer at Nike will look at the track patterns of the sole of their shoes and work with engineers at GM to design different types of tires. But today I have a slightly different approach, because one of the things that they asked us to focus on was to focus on sort of a personal story. So today I'm actually going to talk about something very different. I'm going to talk about my journey to the intersection, which is what I call that point between different fields and different cultures. So I get a chance to talk about myself. So in order to understand my journey, you have to understand a little bit about me. And that involves my parents. My mother is black and Cherokee. We're raised in North Carolina. My father's Swedish. And they met in Germany. But I was born and raised in Sweden, which is here. And now something about Sweden during this time, okay? Sweden consisted basically of two groups of people when I grew up there. One was essentially blonde, blue-eyed, and quite reserved. The other group was me. That's a joke. That's me and my sister. Here's my favorite hobby. I'll come back to it in a second. I was very interested in writing early on. And actually, in high school, I spent a lot of time writing books and stuff for the Swedish version of Dungeons & Dragons, which has played a big part later on in my life. I went to college in this town, in fact, at Brown University. I majored in environmental science for the following reasons. And when I was there, something interesting happened. I saw that there were all these various science departments at Brown, and I didn't feel like they were really communicating with each other. And I wanted to actually bring them all together and have them meet at some point. If I'd known, I would have called it the intersection. I didn't know it at that time. But I created a medium for that. It was called The Catalyst, the magazine. Is Donahue here? John Donahue from yesterday? How are you doing? You have had an impact twice in my life in starting these types of projects, because the very first check cut for this magazine actually came from your department, your science department at Brown University. And there were a bunch of other departments that followed on, and the magazine got started, and I think it's still running wild and crazy on campus. It was great. The thing that it really made me do was it made me realize that I'd planned to do a PhD in marine biology, but this whole entrepreneurial effort inspired me to start a healthcare company based on my aunt's research at Johns Hopkins on pain management. That's my aunt there to the right. And it was sort of the traditional story. I started it with my cousin, her son, in her basement. And after about 3 years of doing that, and that worked out pretty well, actually, developed a couple of patents and went to market in a couple of different places around the world, realized that I was really fascinated about the process of starting a company, but I wasn't particularly interested in healthcare. So sticking to the passion principle, 5 minutes, I needed to move on. Well, anyway, I went to a business school at Harvard just to try to figure out what to do next. It became a software company, which did actually really, really well until it didn't. And then I got an idea for a book. Now, the concept of this book was this whole notion of innovation. In my life, I'd seen that when you combined ideas from different cultures, from different fields, you had a better chance of breaking new ground. I wanted to explore if this was actually true. Intuitively, we can sense it, right? But is it actually true? And I decided to explore this concept of the intersection that had leaped into my mind one morning. Now, here's the second thing. This is a video. This is probably not the video that Donahue showed yesterday. I wasn't here yesterday. But this is the first video I saw from Donahue, because the first person I ended up talking to about this concept of the intersection and bringing together people from different disciplines and fields was the neuroscience team at Brown University. Again, that's the second time. So there's Leon Cooper, Mijail Saruya, and you, and the other people that worked on this particular innovation of trying to understand, to read, in this case, the mind of a monkey. And this is an experiment with a monkey, looking at a computer screen and catching up with that red dot, just thinking about it. And that really set the stage to pursue other stories of people that were at the intersection. Chefs in restaurants, and game designers, and physicians, and engineers, and innovators, and from all over the place. Politicians, business people, athletes, everywhere. It's really a fascinating time to do all of this. I was fortunate enough to get this little advance from HBS Press that really allowed me to go ahead and do it. Now, ultimately, that ended up being the Medici Effect. Wait a minute, you said, I thought you said the book was going to be called The Intersection. Well, the marketing team didn't like The Intersection as the title. Okay, they hated it. Said, there's no way we're going to sell a book called that, so you need to come up with a catchier title. And everybody thinks I came up with that title because of this book, which had come out a couple of months before, and it had done okay in sales. But actually, that's not true. I went into a bookstore and looked at all the business titles to come up with a title for my book, and I couldn't find anything that I liked. And then I was like, well, wait a minute, this is about the intersection. So I went over to the fiction side, and at that point, I realized I looked at Robert Ludlum books, and they have the same title construction, the Prometheus Deception, you know, the Icarus Agenda, and the Born Supremacy. I'm like, wait a minute. That's the Medici Effect. And so that's how I came up with that title. The Medicis, of course, was a family in Florence. So 500 years ago, ruled that city. They did lots of stuff. They poisoned people and did stuff like that. But they also sponsored creative people from lots of different disciplines. You know, artists, sculptors, painters, Leonardo da Vinci, one of the most famous people that they sponsored from all over Europe, even as far away as China. And by bringing them to Florence and allowing them to break down the boundaries between the different fields, between the different cultures, they essentially ignited the Renaissance, one of the most creative eras in Europe's history. Okay, so let me take a moment to tell you what I found, because this was research that took 3 years. And I'll take just a couple of minutes of that. Usually this is the entire focus of my presentation. One thing I found was, this is pretty basic, you know, all new ideas are combinations of existing ideas. This is pretty interesting. You know, you could take something like a screw cap for a water bottle. This is one idea. And in my pocket, I have, completely randomly, a light bulb. So these are two separate ideas, but when you combine them, you get a light fixture, which is how Thomas Edison solved this problem he had of how to attach this light bulb he invented. He used a screw cap for a water bottle. But not all idea combinations are created equal. See, if I tell you that I'm going to combine the concept of a spider with the concept of a web, you say, well, so what? It's been done before. Whereas if I tell you I'm going to combine the concept of a spider with goat milk, well, if there's a connection there, it's likely to be innovative. And there is a connection there. Scientists have taken a gene from the golden orb weaver spider, put it into a herd of goats, and this spider spins a thread about 5 times stronger than steel. They milk the goats, and then they can create materials out of that, like stronger artificial tendons and stronger fishing lines, which I particularly like. And this, of course, companies that do this have a huge leg up on innovation. We have a company like, say, L'Oreal. They'll pull together, as a specific tactic, people from all over the world to innovate their products or marketing strategies. This is the reason why Maybelline was a company that in a couple of years made the #1 brand in over 40 individual countries. It's specifically the diversity of the staff that they hired. This is the reason why they will take a brand like Soft Sheen Carson, which targets which develops hair products for African Americans and now sells it all over the world, including in Asia. Okay, so that was one fact. There's another fact as well, which is that people and teams that break new ground tend to develop and execute far more ideas. That's also why we tend to have more failures of this. We know this anecdotally. Corning release over 4,000 new glass products every year. They're the leader in glass products. Prince, whatever his name is, he has over 1,000 songs that he hasn't released yet to the public, stored in a secret vault. Richard Branson started 250 companies. Started over 250 companies. So what does this quantity-quality relationship to innovation have to do with the Medici effect, or combining separate disciplines? Let me tell you this by saying that let's step into the intersection to see what happens when to the number of ideas you can develop. Okay, so this is actually straight out of my presentation. Richard Branson, of course, is the CEO of Virgin. He also started with Virgin Records in the early 70s. And at that time, Virgin Records made money of only one artist, Mike Oldfield. Mike Oldfield, he created this unique album called Tubular Bells that was at the intersection of, there should be some music now. Thank you. That was at the intersection of rock music and classical music. Okay? So if we go to the early 70s to try to understand how an album like this managed to sit on the #1 spot for 15 straight months in the UK, what was behind the discovery of an album like this? What would happen if you would step into an intersection of rock music and classical music to the number of ideas that you could generate? Well, one way to think about this is that you're a rock musician in the early 70s, and you try to come up with some interesting new rock music. And, well, how do you define rock music? How would you define this field in the early 70s? It's a pretty rigid form of music, actually, counterintuitively enough. You have a limited number of instruments, it's a guitar, drums, a bass, maybe a piano and a saxophone. Very rigid form of structures as well. A song couldn't really be more than 3 minutes, and you have all kinds of choices in terms of vocals. You can sing like this, sing like that, or you do not even need to know how to sing to own this era. Bob Dylan had no clue, didn't prevent him. 2,400 combinations here if you're within this field. Obviously, the true number is higher, but bear with me. A classical composer have other choices, far more instruments, far more structures, no choice in terms of vocals almost. You can maybe have a choir. So imagine now that you have the rock musician here, and that you have the classical composer here, and they try to generate lots and lots of new ideas. Well, if they keep their fields apart like this, the number of idea combinations they can come up with is 2,400. But if they break down the boundaries between the different fields, well, the number of idea combinations rises exponentially. And that's why people that try to explore different fields have far more idea combinations available to them. So, now, how did all this work out for me doing all this research? 2 minutes. Well, first of all, if you think that writing a book on innovation is something you're going to do because of the money, then that's just stupid, because it took 3 years, and basically I was literally down to my very last $2.45. $1.45 of those cents were in my money market savings account. The other dollar was in my pocket. But then things turned around. People really liked the book. It got translated into a bunch of different languages. There's even a game that's been designed around this, and I get to talk to companies like, well, all over the world. And when I do that, I tell them that fashion designers and candy and afros and techno music can connect to things that we don't usually think of, namely things like this. You're going to have to think about the fashion designers and the techno music on your own. I don't have time to cover that. But when I do that, when I tell them that these are the connections that can lay the groundwork for groundbreaking innovations, I also say that these connections don't happen of themselves. In other words, the world is a connected place. But it wasn't created that way. There's someone who made the connections. And then I always end my presentations with, it should be them. So that's it. Thank you.